On the 14th of September 2007, schoolboy Andrew Gosden skipped school and bought a one-way train ticket to London King's Cross. After that, he disappeared. London is one of the most surveilled cities in the world, but 500,000 CCTV cameras failed to capture the circumstances of Andrew's disappearance. Whatever happened to Andrew Gosden? And thank you to Levi MacDonald for bringing this case to our attention. Andrew Gosden lived with his family on the outskirts of Doncaster. His father Kevin, his mother Glenys and his sister Charlotte. To any outsider, they would see that Andrew had a fairly stable family life. Parents were devout Christians, although they didn't impose their beliefs on him. He was very, very gifted. He was very, very good at mathematics. And he was placed in the gifted class at his school. There were high expectations of him to get straight A's in his GCSEs and go on to study mathematics at Cambridge. So he had everything going for him. He was not seen as a loner, although he was happy with his own company. He had a small circle of friends at school, but he didn't seem to associate with them much outside of school. Usually, when not at school, he could be found in his bedroom reading, or down in the basement playing on his Xbox or his portable PlayStation. He had a liking for heavy metal bands and listened to their music a lot. He was pretty much a home bird. He never left the house much, but when he did, he always let his parents know where he was going. And if he wasn't able to talk to them, he usually left a note. And for some reason, a reason I've not yet come across, he had the nickname Roo amongst his family. The other thing, which is perhaps significant, is that he looked younger than he actually was. He looked about 12. He was described as being absent-minded and not very worldly wise, not very streetwise. This perhaps made him a little vulnerable. But despite having a neutral attitude to school, there was no real evidence that he was either bullied or coming under pressure from anyone there. And so this makes the events of the 14th of September 2007 that much stranger. The day before, the 13th, seemed perfectly normal. He'd been to school and come home. Everything was okay during the evening. One thing which is maybe a little bit strange is that on 2 occasions where he would normally take the school bus home, he elected to walk home, some hour and 20 minutes. We don't know the reason for this, but he was a deep thinker. Perhaps he was taking this time to have a bit of introspection or thinking about his life. We just don't know. At any rate, on the 13th, the evening of the 13th, he had dinner as normal with his family. The family then did the dishes together, which they normally did, and Andrew settled down on the floor to do a jigsaw with his father. Later that evening, he watched some comedy programs with his mother. It was on the morning of the 14th of September 2007 that things started to go awry. Andrew, who was normally punctual and pretty laid back and placid, had to be awoken for school by his mother. This was out of character for him. And when he awoke, he was classed as irritable. Despite this, he got ready for school and went off, seemingly normally. He was observed walking through Westfield Park, and this was by a family friend, Reverend Alan Murray. But after this, Andrew didn't go and get his school bus. He took a detour and went to a local garage, where he went to the ATM and drew out £200 from his bank account. We now know that he then backtracked to his house after the rest of the family had left. He was captured on CCTV camera from one of the neighbours' houses. And when he got home, he took off his school uniform and put his blazer and tie on the back of the chair and put the rest of the uniform in the wash. These are things that he would do after coming home from a normal school day. Now, just taking that point first of all, was he trying to leave evidence for his family that everything was normal? Again, we don't know. But he put on a pair of black jeans and a black t-shirt with a logo on for Slipknot, which was one of his favourite heavy metal bands. He then gathered a few meagre belongings, his keys, his wallet, and his portable PlayStation. And he put them in a bag which was smothered in logos and patches of other heavy metal bands that he liked. Very distinctive. But he never took a coat or a sweatshirt or a jumper. He just went out in his t-shirt. And around about 8:30, he left the house again. Significantly, things he left behind were a further £100 that he'd amassed from Christmas money and birthday money, and his passport. He also never took the charger for his portable PlayStation. He was again captured on a neighbour's CCTV walking down Littlemore Lane towards Westfield Park. From there, he went on to Doncaster railway station. We now know that he purchased a one-way ticket to London King's Cross. The lady who sold him the ticket found this a little strange. Firstly, he looked a lot younger. He looked about 12 and he was travelling alone. And when she offered him the possibility of a return ticket, he declined, even though the return ticket would only cost 50p more. At around about 9:35 a.m, he was seen boarding the train to King's Cross. He sat next to a lady who gave evidence to police, who said that he was quiet all the way. He just played on his PlayStation, never interacted with anyone, and he was alone. We know from later CCTV evidence that he arrived at King's Cross station at around 11:20. He was seen walking through the crowds and exiting the station. He was then never seen again. We'll go back to the CCTV evidence and the significance in a moment. Now let's move back to Doncaster and the end of that day. His family got home and thought that everything was normal. They saw his blazer and tie on the back of the chair and his uniform in the wash, and they assumed that he'd come home from a normal school day. His mother went on to prepare dinner as usual, and as they sat down to dinner, Andrew's parents asked Charlotte to go and find her brother. She went up to his room and found he wasn't there. He wasn't in the basement playing on his Xbox either. The family weren't alarmed initially. They thought, oh, he's probably gone off to one of his friends and he just hasn't let us know. This was a little out of character because he usually left a note. And so they started phoning round some of his friends. And this is where the shocks started. Firstly, they were shocked to find that he wasn't at any of his friends. But the next even bigger shock was that his friends said Andrew had not attended school that day. It would subsequently transpire that, as per normal procedure, the school had tried to contact Mr. and Mrs. Gosden, but due to some sort of slip-up, the person making the call had either called the number above Andrew's on the list or below, and just got a telephone that rang and rang and rang, instead of reaching the Gosdens' answer phone where they could have left a message. By around 7 o'clock that evening, the Gosdens had started to panic. Andrew had not gone to school, he was not with his friends. Where was he? And so they called the police, who attended and started taking details. Within about 2 or 3 hours of taking the initial details, the police issued a leaflet around the locality for a missing person. They also searched the area around the Gosdens' home but found nothing. Kevin and Charlotte went out and scouted the route that Andrew would normally take home from school, but again they drew a blank. It was only when, subsequently, one of the leaflets was seen by the lady at Doncaster railway station who'd sold Andrew the ticket that the police found out what had occurred. But this was some 3 days after Andrew had travelled to London. South Yorkshire Police contacted British Transport Police and asked them to review CCTV footage from King's Cross station. Initially, this drew a blank because British Transport Police said they could not see Andrew among the crowds on the footage. It would be a full 3 weeks until a detective from South Yorkshire Police travelled down to London to review the footage himself. On this occasion, Andrew was identified. He was seen walking through the crowds coming away from the train and then seen exiting King's Cross station. But this 3-week delay is very significant. A lot of you will know that London is one of the most surveilled cities in the country, perhaps the world. There are some 500,000 CCTV cameras. What some people don't know is that these cameras only record for a finite time before resetting. This period is not known because it's kept a secret by the authorities. But after a certain period, the cameras reset themselves and wipe the footage they've already recorded. And this is what happened during the 3-week delay from the initial request to British Transport Police to the South Yorkshire detective going down to London. The cameras in the vicinity of King's Cross station and the local area had reset themselves, so there was no footage to show the route that Andrew took after he left the station. And so after that, his whereabouts were a mystery. There was a reported sighting of him in Pizza Hut on Oxford Street, which is around about 2.5 miles from King's Cross Station, and a further sighting at Covent Garden, but regrettably these were never properly followed up by police. And despite British Transport Police and the Metropolitan Police making inquiries in the local area, this again drew a blank, despite the fact that there were several distinctive features about Andrew. He wore very thick prescription glasses because he had bad eyesight, and one of his ears had what can only be described as a double fold in it, something very, very distinctive. But there were no reports of him being seen other than the ones at Pizza Hut and Covent Garden. So we're left with the fact that Andrew disappeared completely after he left King's Cross Station. But we have to wonder, why did he travel to London in the first place? It throws up a multitude of questions. Firstly, we have the fact that he didn't take many belongings with him. Now, was this because he wasn't planning to travel for a long time? Or did he consider this, for some reason, his final journey? Lots of theories surfaced. One of them was from his own family. They said that Andrew liked museums. He'd travelled to London with them on a number of occasions. He knew his way around, and they thought there was a possibility of him having gone sightseeing. But why would he do this on a school day, when he could very well ask permission and go at the weekend and not tarnish his 100% school record? This I find very strange. Andrew also had relations in London. He had a grandmother, and there was the possibility that he'd gone to visit her. But again, significantly, Andrew had already been offered the opportunity to go and stay with his grandmother during the previous school holiday, and this he had declined. But now, around about 8 days into the new school term, we find him travelling to London on his own on a one-way ticket. Police went to the extent of scouting the areas around Chislehurst and Sidcup where he had relations, but again, this did not turn up any evidence of his whereabouts. Now, we already know that Andrew was a heavy metal fan, and people thought there was a possibility he may have travelled to London for something connected with music. Around the time of his disappearance, there was a heavy metal band playing at a venue within walking distance of King's Cross. And there was also a Finnish band who Andrew was familiar with, who were doing a signing at an HMV store in London. Both of these were investigated, but no trace of Andrew was found. During the investigation, Andrew's father, Kevin, was looked at by the police because they thought he may have some sort of connection with his disappearance. But of course, once they found out that Andrew had bought a ticket and was travelling alone from a Doncaster railway station, this was discounted. But it did anger Kevin and Glynis because they felt that this was a distraction to the real investigation which should have been going on in London. And Kevin put forward the theory it was possible that Andrew had had some sort of breakdown and travelled to London because he wanted to start afresh. He wanted to go on an adventure and start a new life. But there are some things against this theory. He didn't take any other clothing with him, no change of clothes. He took the £200 from the ATM, but left a further £100 at his house, and he didn't take his passport either. All things that you would think would go along with starting afresh. Clothing, maximum amount of money, and a passport, opening the possibility of going abroad. But he left these items, so I think we can discount that. A further theory, that he was being bullied at school, or for some reason, perhaps the same reason, he was unsure about his sexuality and he wanted to go to London so that he didn't have to reveal the possibility that he might be gay to his parents. At one stage, Kevin went to the extent of contacting the gay community in London and asking around as to whether they'd seen any trace of Andrew. Again, this drew a blank. We also had the theory that Andrew travelled to London on this one-way ticket, don't forget, so he had no intention of coming back, it would seem, to end his own life. We have to ask, why would he do this? He seemed to have a bright future ahead of him, a stable family life. There was no evidence of depression. And at the end of the day, his body would have been found, I'm sure, had he have taken his own life. But this didn't happen. Yes, there was a possibility of something accidentally befalling him. There was a canal, the Regent's Canal, in the vicinity of where he got to in London. Now, this was never looked into and the canal was never dredged. We also have the River Thames, and at a later stage, Andrew's family went to the extent of asking a company to perform a sonar search of the Thames. But again, nothing was found. And so finally, we're left with the possibility that Andrew was in contact with someone who he travelled to London to meet, but the evidence is again against this. He was not on social media. He didn't go on the internet, and indeed there was only one computer in the Gosden household. This was a laptop which belonged to his sister Charlotte. This was forensically examined by police and they found nothing. They also examined computers at the local library and at his school, again drawing a blank. Yes, there is the possibility that he went to a friend's house and used the computer there, but when asked, his friends discounted this. And there's an outside possibility that Andrew went old school, and perhaps he was holding a conversation with someone by snail mail, or what we used to call letters. But if he did travel to London to meet someone, we just don't know what happened after that. But despite not knowing the reason why he travelled to London, there's always the possibility that when he did get there, and we know that he did arrive, he fell foul of someone who had ill intent. He could have just randomly run into someone who did him harm. And so the case went completely cold. But several things did happen after this. In 2008, a man went to Leominster police station, or Leominster as some people pronounce it. It was late in the day and the main police station had shut, so he spoke to people on the desk via intercom and said he had information regarding Andrew Gosden's disappearance. By the time a police officer reached the front door to take the details, the man had disappeared. After this, Andrew Gosden's case was featured on the BBC The One Show. And shortly after this, someone wrote to the BBC claiming to be the man who had tried to contact police. Again, this didn't go any further, and there was no confirmation that the man who wrote the letter was the same man that visited the police station. Again, another cold lead. In 2009, the Gosden family released some photographs which were age progressed, hoping to show what Andrew would look like 2 years later. And as the years went by, periodically, both the Gosden family and the police made fresh appeals for information as to what might have happened to Andrew. But in January 2022, South Yorkshire Police issued a statement. Now, this statement said that in 2021, 2 men had been arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and human trafficking. Human trafficking. This brings in another possible fate for Andrew Gosden. Now, during this investigation, numerous electronic devices were seized, but it took ages for these to be forensically examined, and all they turned up were some indecent images of children. The investigation wore on, but in September 2023, the 2 men were released without charge, and South Yorkshire Police stated categorically they were confident that the 2 men were not involved in the disappearance of Andrew Gosden. And so here we find ourselves over 17 years later. The Gosden family have no closure, they have no clue, no true clue as to why Andrew just upped and left home, and they have no inkling of what happened to him. I myself can't even begin to imagine what goes through the minds of the family on a daily basis. I do know that Charlotte, his sister, subsequently married, and tribute was paid to Andrew in his absence at her wedding. It's also reported that the Gosden family have kept Andrew's room exactly as it was in 2007 when he left. Perhaps this is in the hope that one day he might walk back through their front door. I guess it's the hope of all of us that this might happen and that nothing terrible happened to Andrew that day that he left. Our thoughts and feelings go out to the Gosden family, along with our sympathy. And on that note, I'll ask you to stay curious and stay safe, and I'll thank you for watching.